people will say bank of mum and dad, and it's such an easy cop-out, but like going back to my work ethic that they both drove into me when I was young. Like I work 7 days a week. The only days I'll have off is public holidays, annual leave and sick days. The rest of the days I will be working.
The difficulty of actually young people getting into the market at this stage?
There's always different ways that you can get in, but my biggest thing, other than the hard work and sacrifice aspect that a lot of people, I guess, miss and aren't willing to put in the work, is just looking at alternatives and setting your expectations a little bit lower than what you think you can get into the market with. One of the first things I check is stock on market and the way that's trending. So I've got a figure of what I want the stock on market within that area to be. Ultimately, property is a supply and demand game. So if there's more supply than there is demand, prices are likely going to drop or plateau. And if there's an increased demand but not enough supply, which a lot of the markets, the Perths, the Adelaides, the Brisbanes have seen the last few years, that's when properties start booming.
All right, well, today I'm with Harley. I've been following you on Instagram for quite a while and I've been loving seeing your progress. So thanks for coming into the studio.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Bo. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so obviously we're talking a bit about off camera, what you've got into with the broking stuff, and what a fantastic place to start the journey in terms of your education. I know the journey of the education probably started a fair bit earlier when you got into your first property, but maybe just tell the viewers a bit about, I suppose, where you're sitting at the moment. And I believe it's 23 and well into the property game.
Yeah, so 24, so I'm getting on a little bit. Yeah, 24. So currently work as an associate broker. So that's my full-time gig, the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So they're at a company that deals with property investment. We've got a mortgage broking side and buyer's agency, like a lot of firms out there. So yeah, we've got some sort of academy there. So just been kind of going through the ranks and doing my diploma at the moment to be a qualified broker. So yeah, the day-to-day basically dealing with a lot of clients, a lot of emailing, a lot of banks, which is not always fun stuff, but I enjoy seeing what other people are doing with their property portfolios. I find that very motivating. So yeah, I've got that job, and then I also work part-time at BP as well. So the entry-level kind of jobs aren't always the highest paying. So for me to want to build a portfolio, I knew I needed to supplement my income. So that ended up with me working at a BP, which a lot of people laugh at, but I really enjoy it because it's 20, 25 hours a week on top of my full-time work where I can turn my brain off. It pays the bills, it helps with my servicing, and it's helped with my deposits as well as I've purchased properties.
Fantastic. And that's the big thing, isn't it? Like basically you've got your education side of what you're doing with your employment. So you've got your associate broking stuff and you'd be learning an absolute monstrous amount of information, which is great. And I remember when I was doing mortgage broking myself, it was such a big learning curve. So hats off to you for going through it. And I guess the other flip side of it is you're actually working hard to actually get those deposits together and essentially have that savings so that you can duplicate, so you can show serviceability. So that's absolutely phenomenal. And my story is actually very similar. I was Uber and working at Aussie Home Loans. So very similar backstory.
That's sick.
Fantastic. So I suppose what prompted you to want to get into property as an investment vehicle, let's say?
Yeah, it's my journey kind of started back. I was probably like, if we go way back, I've always kind of been that kid, I guess, kind of motivated by money. I'd always look at the celebrities, the footy stars, the sports stars, and see their mansions and the cars they drove and all that. And I was always somewhat, I wanted that. I realised pretty early on I wasn't going to be a sports star, didn't have the athleticism or talent. But I just knew early on that I wanted to, I guess, live a life a little bit more special. So I wanted more from life. So early on, I knew to be able to get to that level, I would have to invest. So I remember being about 14 or 15 and Mum made probably one of the best purchases she's ever made, which was the typical Australian getting started in property investing, finance. You probably start with The Barefoot Investor as a book.
Yep.
I learned a lot of my basic, like the very early principles, compound interest, investing early, and just showing what that would do over decades of investing. So I remember starting there about 14 or 15 and reading that book. I actually opened up a CommSec account in my mum's name at 16 so that I could start buying index funds with my little part-time job at the time. So that kind of kick-started my investment journey. So I knew that if I put money in, put time into the market that 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, I would have millions of dollars. So that's kind of where I started off.
So you explored a few different investment vehicles and then you decided that property was going to be the one for you.
Yeah, so as I really enjoyed that first book and I guess educating myself. So I read, as you go through the journey, you read other books, you listen to other people's stories, and I kind of naturally fell into property. It's the wealth vehicle that the majority of millionaires are made through. It's that reason. It's that vehicle for a reason. It's a great way to store your money and build your wealth. So yeah, I looked at property mainly for the leverage factor, leveraging shares, and that's quite dicey work. You'd have to really know what you're doing to leverage shares. So I just like the fact that you could leverage property, use the growth, and then build into another property. So yeah, that's where I kind of ended up at around 20 to 22 when I really started going hard on educating about property and wanting to get in.
Fantastic. And tell us about when you first made that step into property investment. What was that like? Was that quite daunting for you? Was there a lot of research behind that, or did you just sort of jump in?
Yeah, so it was a couple years coming. So I was probably about 20 when I really decided I wanted to get into property. I didn't actually purchase my first till I was 22. So it was 2 years of I read a lot of books. I listened to a lot of podcasts. Like daily, I really took pride in learning each day.
Plenty of research, just being an absolute sponge.
So much research, and I still went down the path of using a buyer's agent. At the time, I still didn't feel like I knew enough, and I knew how important your first property was for a purchase. If you kind of make a mistake early, you could be stuck for years on end.
Definitely.
Or even lose money.
Opportunity cost is massive too, like the time value of money and being stuck on a lazy asset of which is hurting your borrowing capacity. Yeah. Absolute killer.
So. And so many people look at it at just if you make a loss, but like you said, the opportunity cost of sitting on an asset that hasn't grown in 3 years when you could have had one that's really grown, it kind of, to me, it warranted the buyer's agent fee. So I went with someone I'd really done a lot of research on. I knew if I was going to fork out a hefty fee that I wanted to make sure I was getting into bed with the right person. So used a buyer's agent for that first one and then really got the bug. So after that first property, I knew I wanted to keep buying, and it was good to see some early growth and see the value grow. So I knew from there that I spent hundreds of hours educating myself. I spent a lot of money on courses, mentoring, all the different things to try and get myself up to speed so that I knew what I was doing when I purchased my next property on my own.
Definitely. And with the buyer's agent side of things, maybe take us through a bit about that process for those people that haven't used a buyer's agent. Is it something that perhaps at the time you thought was the right thing? Or looking back, would you do it again, like as your first?
Yeah, at the time, because exactly what you touched on earlier, the opportunity cost, the time it would have taken me to fully understand how markets work and how to buy a property, it probably would have been another 6 to 12 months minimum, which in that time, the property that we ended up buying has probably grown $150,000. So looking back, it wasn't a mistake or anything like that. From there, I did know that I wanted to build a substantial portfolio. So being on a lower income, I knew that the fees were going to quite hurt me in terms of deposits. So I just really wanted to learn property. So I spent that next kind of 6 to 12 months going really hard on the education, spending money, educating myself, putting the time in, and then I felt quite comfortable to be able to buy that next property. But overall, it is a daunting process. So if you are looking to get into property, buyer's agency is not a bad way to start. It's definitely what I would recommend if you don't know what you're doing. That being said, just obviously do your research, because like in any profession, every builder, that everyone's at a different level. So you just want to make sure that you're really getting into bed with someone that's done what you want to do.
For sure, definitely. And you want to make sure that you understand the reason why you're investing in that property too. Like, it's good to use a seasoned professional. That's great. But it's also good to learn as much as possible from that first investment, absorb as much information, and really understand the metrics, the data and the statistics of why you're making that leap into that specific property. So yeah, that sounds great. It sounds like that first investment, similar to almost your work situation, helped you to do very well financially, but B, actually learn a lot. Would you say that balance was quite good there?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely looked at it like it was not only the fee to find the property. I was asking a million questions and like really trying to learn off the buyer's agent, almost trying to pick his mind for what I wanted to do going forward. But yeah, they were great who we used and walked us through the process.
Awesome. And in terms of like why you selected that particular investment, let's go state-wise and property, itself, like maybe the characteristics, maybe take us through, like, was that a house with land content? Was that an apartment, a townhouse, like a co-living? Like what was that exactly and why did you get into that specific asset?
Yeah, so the first one, obviously, we relied on a lot of the buyer's agent was telling us at the time. At the end of the day, if you've done your research right, you'd need to trust them wholeheartedly. So we trusted what they had to say. It ended up being a property in Perth. So this was just over 2 years ago now.
Great.
Was a 4-bed, it's a 5-bed, 2-bath on about 600 square metres. Had the right zoning, had it's got development potential, site access, all that kind of good stuff. 10 minutes from the city, like buying in Perth 2-3 years ago, it was good buying.
Fantastic, yeah.
Especially hindsight's a great thing. You can look back now and say it's great buying, but at the time it was around 450 and we've had recent valuations over 750 on that one.
Amazing. That's incredible. Congratulations on that and a credit for you for taking the action. And I often speak to investors that have been in the market for a decade and they've been buying and selling and doing different sorts of things. And often they echo the same mistakes that they made. When I ask them, what is the biggest mistake that you've made? They often say selling an asset, and they also say not buying when they felt like it was the right thing to do and just being spooked by people that perhaps really had no reason to provide seeds of doubt in an asset that perhaps they didn't even understand, whether it's your hairdresser or, whoever it is, chucking or your uncle at the barbecue, Christmas or whatever. They really got no business into it and, you can be polite about it, but, you really got to stick to your gut and not let those people who aren't in that situation dictate what you're going to do.
I was definitely like that when you first kind of start. You listen to everyone. You're young. You're buying property. It's quite daunting, quite overwhelming, and at the end of the day, like a lot of what I've read and that I've gotten to the point now where it's like you've got to kind of block out a lot of that noise, and it's like listen to kind of people that have done what you want to do and like where you want to go. So there's, like you said, the Rob at your uncle's barbecue that has his 2 cents on why you shouldn't buy in Perth. Everyone's going to have that person in their life, and it's just kind of sticking true to what you know and what you want to do.
Definitely. Your biggest tips around navigating that would be education, would you say?
Pretty much. I sound like a broken record, but you literally can't put a price on education. And at the end of the day, we want to be making educated decisions. So looking back at Perth, you probably could have thrown a dart anywhere in Perth 3 years ago and done well, but it's just not the right way to invest. If you were to do that now, that like you could possibly lose money. If you threw that dart and it ended up in Melbourne a year ago, you're losing money at the moment in a lot of suburbs. So there is a lot of education that does go into it and making sure that you really know what you're buying before you do. These are probably going to be the biggest investments you ever make in your life. So
what do you suggest of getting the equilibrium of taking action but also researching? Like obviously you don't want to get that analysis paralysis sort of situation and never buy anything. So what would your flip side kind of balanced argument be?
Yeah, so obviously the education, like knowing when's the right time that you feel like you're educated enough, it's the $1 million question. I feel like relying on the people that you put around you is a big thing. So not Rob at the local barbecue, but for me, I have a really savvy accountant and a mortgage broker. So both of them have 8-figure portfolios. They've both done what I want to do. So like they're really good sounding boards for me. A lot of the education is on your own. It's reading books, listen to podcasts, courses, all different things that you can educate yourself. But at the end of the day, that first time you take the jump, it's still going to feel like a massive leap. I still remember the first one I purchased on my own. So it was my second property. I'd already gone through the process for my first, and I was still bloody nervous. I go, this is like, balls are on the line here. This is all the work you've done for the last 3 years. Now you've got to put your money where your mouth is and make a decision. And thankfully it paid off.
Fantastic. I remember when I bought my first investment, I took the drive down to Ballarat and I went to a suburb called Windaree inside Ballarat, met the agent, got the contract to sale on the 32. I'd already put the offer in. I was going down to write it out and formalize it. At the time, we didn't have DocuSign or anything like that. And I remember doing a bunch of research and, having listened to so many hours of podcasting. And I wrote about, I'm going to say 15 to 20 different clauses in my section 32. There was the normal ones, building, pest, etc. But then there was also like, conveyancer diligence. There was, just all these other things that just completely don't make any sense, And I suppose that was my way to actually, get in. I felt like I definitely wanted to get in, but I wanted to manage my risk as well. How would you manage your risk?
Yeah, so again, you sound like a broken record, but the education, obviously, that goes without saying. You need to feel somewhat educated and know what you're talking about before you get into the bed. But at the end of the day, you're only as good as the team you put around you. So having the right professionals in place, having a great conveyancer. So my properties have all been interstate. As a Victorian purchasing interstate, I wasn't privy to all the laws and policies and all those different things in the different states. So having a great conveyancer in the area, they walk me through a lot of what I can put in, what does the building and pest work like in that state compared to that state. And at the end of the day, you're probably never going to know everything yourself. So you do need to rely on these professionals, and I feel like I've done a great job of putting the right people around me.
That's fantastic. And so important as well. Like just putting these people in place, because they're going to guide and dictate what you're doing as well. And importantly, making sure that everything you're doing is legal from the accounting perspective. And conveyance is extremely important. Maybe this is one that not many people do know. Quantity surveyor for depreciation schedules. Is that maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that and if you've done a bit of that in your career?
Yeah, so I haven't had too much to do with it just because my properties have been a little bit older.
Okay,
so,
sure.
So they're not even depreciating yet. But definitely having a great accountant. The accountant I use, he's got roughly $25 million worth of property.
Fantastic.
He's been massive in helping me. So onto my fourth property at the moment, but he was really big in the purchase and structuring my third property well so that I could continue purchasing on an income that isn't amazing, which I'm
Tell us about trust, because I know you started to get into that a little bit. I believe the first or second property, I believe the first one, if I'm not mistaken, you did that in your personal name. And then shortly after you moved into trusts. Why was that, and how have you found that process?
Yeah, so first two in the personal name. Third one, it was going to be the end of my borrowing power on the income and my spending, basically. I live at home for people that don't know me. I'm very frugal. I follow a budget. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to cut any more expenses. Mm-hmm. So the only way if I purchase that third property in my personal name to buy again would be by increasing my income or just paying down some debt. And on my income, that wasn't it wasn't going to be a quick process to be able to do that. So I started educating myself on other vehicles to purchase property. You'd hear stories about people buying 40, 50, 100 properties. And I always used to wonder how the hell they did it. Like, unless you're on millions of dollars, it's going to be hard to service these loans. And that's when I got onto the different ways you can kind of purchase a property. So I ended up learning about a corporate trustee structure, so purchasing trust and company structure. Got the accountant to help me set that up. And basically the reason that I purchased in that structure was that if I could get that property positively geared, that some lenders will disregard that debt in the trust and allow me to purchase again. So essentially, if that property is positive, some banks will turn a blind eye to the property that's in that trust and allow me to open another trust and purchase again, which it wouldn't have been possible if I purchased in my personal name.
Huge. And in terms of the lenders that you found being in the broking industry, are there many lenders with the appetite for that? And how much higher interest rates would you be looking at as an investor? Maybe they might have to factor it in a little bit.
Yeah, so not too much in terms of rates being higher. Like they're pretty similar. They may be slightly higher. Borrowing within a trust and company structure will be slightly lower. Maybe it's 10, 15, 20% lower than what it would be in your personal name. So you do need to take that into account. But yeah, the lenders that I'm using at the moment, CBA, NAB, Macquarie, a lot of the big ones do have an appetite for trust lending. And at the end of the day, the people that are buying in trusts are more sophisticated investors. So it's not for everyone, but the people that are buying in these structures are looking to buy multiple properties and they're pretty good customers at the end of the day.
Decent from an asset perspective way as well, but obviously speak to your professionals in that regard. Obviously, neither of us are accountants or FPs. So
absolutely, and it's not a strategy for everyone. Like people, I get a lot from the content I post. A lot of people do ask about it, and it's not a strategy for everyone. It suits me in my circumstances, but yeah, the first and foremost, you'll need to speak to an accountant and see if it's right for you.
Definitely, and as time progresses, you'll, I suppose, work out that balance of what you need to put in your personal name versus a trust. So if income in personal name for whatever reason starts to skyrocket, then you want to have as much add backs as possible for your negatively gearing to then get good tax returns. But then perhaps then perhaps if you're going through more of a learning phase or you're starting a business of which, you got the financials, et cetera, that you're going to require the 2 years financials, then, perhaps you're going to be more suited to continuing down the trust. So you're just going to weigh it up as that period of time goes.
Yeah, correct. And it's like looking at the pathway. So the reason I got into property at the end of the day, I want a passive income. So in my 30s, I have a goal to have a $250,000 a year passive income. So I'm 24. Sounds really in your face at this big 250 a year, but set myself a big goal. And so I've got myself 15 years to achieve this. But working backwards, you can kind of have a rough plan on how you want to get towards that goal. Yeah. But the pathway is always going to be changing, whether that's staying in resi, whether that's moving to commercial, whether it's some in your personal name, opening a business. I don't know exactly what it is. I just know roughly how I want to get there.
Absolutely. And off to a cracking start. One thing I want to say, actually, I was talking to my friend about this. He's in a similar industry to me, started investing in property about 23. Now he's got about an 8-figure portfolio. He's doing very, very well. And actually, him and I, we set goals about 7-8 years ago of what we wanted to achieve. And we hit it. But one of the big regrets that we actually said to each other is not actually aiming higher. Because at the end of the day, you're going to work hard regardless. You're going to, do what you got to do regardless. And obviously you're working 2 jobs and 15-hour days, et cetera. Yeah. So on this podcast right now, I would actually challenge you to, if it's to 35 at 250,000 passive income, honestly, from this moment forward, I would say that's too low. And I would say you can actually up that. And that might sound a bit awkward saying that in public, but honestly, once you get there, you'll hit it. And if you're sitting at 250 when you could be at 500, I think you could do it,
The opportunity cost, yeah, for sure. And I feel like the old saying you always hear, the shoot for the moon, you end up in the stars. So shoot for more. So that's where I'm at the moment, but fantastic. I'm very ambitious. So I don't want to be too in the face and say a million in 5 years, but I'm happy with where it is. But don't worry, I will be pushing.
Goals. That's probably a good
Pretty
idea.
much, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Another thing that I like that you do is you showcase the journey as well. It's very easy for people to sit there and go, mum and dad gave it to you or this sort of thing, but actually showcasing the long days and everything. A big credit to my mum was that I was able to leave at home rent-free till 26, and then I started paying board. So it was kind that I was able to last that long, which was great, and that helped me massively. What role have your parents played in your success? Yeah,
similar. Like I owe everything to my parents. Got great parents. They do anything for me. Similar story. I pay very little board. Yep. It's nominal, so people laugh and they call the bank mum and daddy all the time. But I guess that's why they're my why. They're the reason I work so hard. I want to be able to give back to them one day because they've sacrificed to give me and my sister the best kind of upbringing we could possibly have. So they're one of the reasons I definitely work so hard. But at the same time, people will say bank of mum and dad, and it's such an easy cop out. But like going back to my work ethic that they both drove into me when I was young. Like I work 7 days a week. The only days I'll have off is public holidays, annual leave, and sick days. The rest of the days I will be working, and I'm driven. I spend so much time educating myself, so much time budgeting, making content for you guys, and just kind of like on this journey. So my thing is, yes, they've helped me along the way, but I can promise I'm going to outwork a lot of the people that comment bank of mum and dad.
Love it. And where did you get your work ethic from? If you have to pull back the layers, like for me, it was single mother, seeing her struggling, hands in the head, complaining about money, not sure where food's going to come from, all of this sort of stuff when I'm 14, 15, 16, throughout high school for a lot of it. From your end, where do you think that strong driver comes from?
Yeah, so definitely looking at my parents' work ethic was like a big driver. So mum's a hairdresser, dad's a firefighter. So they're not CEOs, they're not doctors or anything like that. A lot of people comment and think's quite funny. But growing up, like we always knew that if we wanted a good bike or a good Sharon footy or something like that, that you need to work hard and you need to save. So pretty early on, I was hay baling on local farms. I was doing the paper route and lawn mowing, any different kind of job you could think of. I was trying to do it, babysitting. I've done it all. But I just knew early on they instilled that you need to work hard, you need to save, and that's how you're going to get what you want.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose, I was talking to a good friend of mine. He's a commercial property developer, and we were talking about, the the difficulty of actually young people getting into the market at this stage. I suppose, I would credit that perhaps, and not perhaps, factually, it was easier to get into the market previously. In 2000s, actually, I saw a statistic. So in the year 2000, the median house price of Sydney was $312,000. The average Australian income was $41,000. Now in 2024, the median Australian housing income is $947,000, with the average median income at $89,000. So, and keeping in mind that for the first example, for $312,041, I used Sydney, which was actually the
most expensive,
suburb. I couldn't actually find any other data. So, it's definitely gotten harder, and I definitely recognize that for young people. But at the same time, if you've got the will, if there's a will, there's a way. And what would your advice be for those younger people that just sort of sit there, sort of saying it's too hard? You'd say it's doable. I guess you're a walking testament to it.
Yeah, I definitely like it. It's rich for me to say from where I'm standing that it is doable. But if you're like any other young person, if you listen to the news, you read the headlines, it is all doom and gloom, and that's what sells papers. That's what sells clicks. So telling someone they're going to be able to purchase a property isn't going to get them the views that they want. So a lot of media do buy into that our kids and the people growing up my age will never be able to buy, and like it's just not to buy into that. So many people, like the articles you see, they'll say that this is the average income here in Australia. To be able to purchase the average house in Sydney, it's going to take you 24 years, for example. That's just using rough numbers. But they don't take into fact that you may not buy exactly where you want to live first up. There's going to be some sacrifices. I couldn't have bought in my hometown. Like it's 1.2 million. There's not a chance I would have bought that off the bat, but I knew that there was other markets within Australia that you can buy in, more affordable markets. There's units, there's different types of properties that you can be buying. And even the 20%, like no longer do you need that 20% coming from the broking side of things. You can get in with a 5-10% deposit depending on your circumstances. So there's always different ways that you can get in. But my biggest thing, other than the hard work and sacrifice aspect that a lot of people, I guess, miss and aren't willing to put in the work, is just looking at alternatives and setting your expectations a little bit lower than what you think you can get into the market with. As I said, I wouldn't have been able to buy in my hometown. Probably still couldn't. If I sold my properties, I could get in comfortably. But I started investing in property 2 years ago, and now I could comfortably get into my hometown, which
stepping stone.
You
Absolutely.
get one, use a bit of equity growth, get into another. Maybe that's when you decide to buy the owner occupy and start your family. Whatever your story is, what your goals are with property. I just hate that like overarching that you can never get into property because there's always options.
Well, it's a defeated mindset, isn't it? And I guess that's the problem. At the end of the day, you want to, you can't change your game, unfortunately. I mean, you can vote different politicians in with their own ideas and everything, but at the end of the day, if you can't change the game, if you're set in a condition where the bank's got their lending parameters and your income is limited, you have to play the game, and that game is stepping stone, buying what you can afford, letting the market do its thing, leveraging, and basically using the equity to duplicate if that's the case, and continue to save and work hard. It's sacrifice, and it's it's what that immigration mentality is. A lot of these immigrants come in, and within 3 or 4 years, they're buying properties, and then these people, here who have lived here, perhaps have had an easy life, perhaps have had a hard life, whatever, but they're happy to just sit and complain and say daddy and mummy's money when, they're not having a genuine crack themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That immigrant mindset. There's a lot of victim mentality around here, and I hate complainers. So that's a big thing I changed maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I just stopped complaining, like from a personal perspective.
No one cares.
No one cares. Everyone's going through their own shit. So I'm in a very fortunate situation. But 2-3 years ago, I had some family members pass away through cancer and kind of really tough scenarios. And that's where I really get my positive outlook is I'm 24 years old. I've got a great family. I've got a great job. I live in one of the luckiest countries in the world. There's not a lot to complain about. So for all the people that are sulking and complaining that they can't get into property, just broaden your mindset. There's people doing a lot tougher than we are.
Absolutely, absolutely. We live in a great country, and what a fantastic place to live. Sure, the taxes are a bit high, but I've been to over 35 countries, and I'm certainly very thankful that I live here in Australia. Helping mum and dad is a big one for you. That's great. One of my notes was, I suppose, what do they think about your audacious goal of 250,000 as a passive income? Is something that you share with them? And
yeah, so they're right in on it. They're my biggest supporters.
Nice.
So I've kind of really changed their perspective and their look at retirement. So now I'm almost managing their retirement. So we've just set Dad up a self-managed super fund. We've set him up a trust, and we're going through a buyer's agent at the moment to purchase a couple of properties for them. And they're your typical everyday Australians. They're a firefighter, they're a hairdresser, they grew up at the local footy club. The most Australian kind of people you could think about. Yeah. That's my parents. So everything I'm kind of saying, the big goal of 250 a year, and that they're supportive, but there's still a little bit
that's a big number.
Yeah, let's see if he gets there. But definitely. They've given me their full support. So yeah.
Tell us how you work out that 250,000 in terms of how much assets you're going to need for that.
Yeah, so roughly, just off rough calculations, using a 5% yield, I would need roughly 5 million in net assets. So how I build there, how I get to that point is a different question. Obviously, I'm going to continue on my path at the moment, purchasing through different structures and building out the portfolio and the asset base. But like I said before, I touched on it a little bit. The next part of my investing that I'm researching and educating myself on the moment is commercial side, so the higher net yields, but obviously you will need the larger deposits, you'll need the bigger buffers because there's larger vacancy rates and vacancy periods, So it's just a different kind of investing strategy. So I don't have the full clear picture. No one ever has the full blueprint to get you to that point 15 years from now. What the property landscape's going to look like 15 years from now, who knows? I just know that I've got a rough figure of what I want to get there. To work back, if I was just buying resi, it's probably looking at 8 houses giving me 500 a week. That's 40
Definitely,
a year.
That's sort of paid off. And then I guess you would get to a point where you can hold as many properties as possible with the leverage factor, and then benefit off the growth and everything like that, the deductions and the depreciation and everything that you use, perhaps. And then you would then decide, depending on what part of the process you're in, whether it's accumulation, consolidation, or preservation, whether you're going to sell off or continue down that path. And instead of going for 200, I hope we're going for 500 or 750.
Yeah.
Is that sort of the thought?
That's the basic gist of it. So you purchase the property. I'm in the accumulation phase at the moment, just trying to build out the asset base as best as I can. Got a lot of kind of bread and butter, like real good capital growth properties in there at the moment. But as you kind of go throughout the journey and get towards the more of the tail end, the sell down kind of period, that's when we might be looking at more commercial, like I said, or it might be house and granny flats. I might be trying to inject some cash flow so that we're left with these high yielding assets rather than ones that are just growing, because the growth in your retirement doesn't matter as much as the money that comes in each week.
For sure. And at what age do you feel like you'd probably move to more of a consolidation phase, a bit of a enjoy the fruits of your labour, stop and smell the roses?
Yeah. See, this is my biggest concern is it's not a concern. I just know I'm the kind of person that will do it is, if I want to reach that goal at 35, you probably start selling down in the early 30s towards that period. But I can just see myself being early 30s and not wanting to slow down.
Sure.
So if I to keep to my strategy and the 250 a year goal, that's probably the period I would start, early 30s. But if I'm in my early 30s and I'm building this portfolio and I'm doing what I love, which I really do enjoy property, so hopefully at that stage I'm just going to keep going.
Nice. It's interesting that you're into commercial property, obviously from a yield perspective. And my colleague beforehand is a commercial property developer, and he was talking about all the things that you don't pay for when you purchase commercial property. So the things like your council rates, your water rates, your body corporate, often your property management fees, sometimes even your land tax. So he's also sort of said that once you put the yield side by side, because often we talk about resi in a gross perspective, but
net is
so
different.
Commercial, so different. So all of those things on the commercial side are all paid for, which is handy from a set and forget perspective. My question was going to be actually a bit left field as well. I get a lot of people actually DM me from time to time, and also the company account, saying that property investment should not be an asset class and you shouldn't try and capitalize off shelter and this sort of thing. Do you get a lot of that too? And do you have much of a say on that in terms of affordable housing? I mean, not everybody's got the money to buy a property and people do need places to live. So I don't know. What would your 2 cents be there? Do you have any ethical concerns with property investment and accumulating so many properties?
Not so much with the accumulation. I feel like there's definitely a way you need to hold yourself and conduct yourself when you do invest in property. So for me, you
being
can push
a fair landlord and this
being
sort of
a fair
thing.
landlord. If there's maintenance issues, be the first one to fix it. If there's even rent, like instead of pushing the envelope and trying to get exactly top dollar, if they're great tenants, fair market rents, these kind of things are like. It goes without saying that
gives landlords a good name, and it's tough for tenants out there that are probably just trying to get by. But at the end of the day, I suppose you've got a few properties and this sort of thing. I can barely put food on the table. So yeah, I believe that nobody deserves a handout and everybody deserves what they've worked for. But yeah, I think it's good advice that you've said where being a fair landlord, what goes around comes around. And if tenants feel like they're taken care of, they're less likely to do one over on you on the way out.
Yeah, and I get a lot of comments and DMs as well about that kind of aspect of is it ethical and stuff like that. And like we said, you wouldn't, without investors, without landlords here in Australia, people need somewhere to live. Like you said, not everyone can afford a property to live in. So we're providing houses at fair market rent without these. So with all the land tax issues and stuff that's going on in Victoria at the moment with people selling their properties, and it's almost like pitchforks kind of put against investors. I feel like it may be a little bit misguided where the anger is, where the reason we're in a housing crisis is we're not building enough houses. We're at record lows for the last decade. We've just let in the most amount of immigrants into the country that we've ever let in. So over 1 million people into a market that was already in a rental crisis. So these people come in and they're not the problem. Don't get me wrong, they're definitely not the problem, but they do need somewhere to live and they're not coming straight in to buy. So they're just going straight into that rental market. So when they talk about scrapping negative gearing and kind of putting these pitchforks against investors, if investors sell up, you're going to be relying on the government, and I don't think that's a positive for everyone if you're relying on the government for housing. Yeah,
definitely. In terms of some of your ideal areas that you've liked in the sense of the states, I know you've purchased a property in Perth. Melbourne hasn't done much. Is your fourth investment in Melbourne, or are you still out of that market?
So at the moment, fourth one looking at regional Queensland.
Okay.
So just purely for price point. So looking at the 500-ish range. So there's still quite a few markets there doing well. Melbourne, I do think Melbourne's got a lot of value. It does look quite undervalued. The data through my research just hasn't been there at the moment. But that being said, when does it turn? Does a rate cut or two turn this around? These are the things that no one can fully forecast and see that's going to change. But from a value perspective, there's no way on earth, in my opinion, that Perth and Adelaide should be more expensive than Melbourne.
Crazy.
It's just nuts to me. Economy size, population size. It's pretty crazy that they're more expensive. So I do see there being value. Just a matter of when does it turn.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people are talking. I mean, I've got clients that have bought in Perth. Similar situation to yourself. I had clients buy 470, 480, early fives in Perth, and now those properties are sitting above $700,000. And they're wanting to duplicate, and they think they can buy the same thing in Perth, and it obviously doesn't work that way. So, there is, we do invest in regional Queensland as your fourth investment property is, but also, we do a bit in Victoria as well now. We've circled back there, but we carried through South Australia a lot. That did very well. We had price points there. We had clients in there at 300,000, 350.
Yeah, it's
nuts. It's fantastic. And now that's over 6, which is great. So all of those guys are looking to duplicate, and those markets that they actually did really well in and made that money on, the only place where they can get the 500,000 level at this point is probably regional Queensland or somewhere in Victoria. South Australia is a bit landlocked, and a few of these other places are a bit tough. So, yeah, it's going to be certainly very interesting what happens.
Yeah, and like I said, with the plan, you've got this goal and you want to reach this, but the landscape of property is changing all the time. Like we're talking about markets now, it's going to be hard to buy under 500 nearly in a house in Australia-wide. Like that's right. It's pretty crazy unless you're looking regional. So you're pretty well priced out of a lot of capital cities at that point. And we may never go back. It's just going to be the new norm. So it's about kind of being flexible with your strategy. If it was house and land, like everyone would love to buy, but you can't always afford. Maybe it's a unit in a small complex or whatever it is that you decide to do. You've just always got to be changing.
Well researched and buying what you can afford is probably a good equilibrium of investment, I'd say. No, that's great. And in terms of your own personal investing journey, what would you say some of the biggest mistakes that you've made investing wise are, if there were any?
Big mistakes. I wouldn't say it's
I haven't made any mistakes.
No, I'm not perfect, trust me. I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but like looking back and it might sound rich, like 22 purchasing your first property, but it's like I think you said it earlier in the podcast, just wish I did it sooner. Like wish I was that 18-year-old. I was already interested in finance. I was already interested in investing, and I probably had the capital back then that I could have got in earlier. Once I did purchase that first property, it took me about a year and a bit to kind of get into that next one. Same thing, I had the deposit ready. I just wasn't ready to go mentally and didn't have enough education at the time. But I definitely could have pushed it a little bit harder and going forward, I want to start pushing it that little bit harder to go to the next level. So, not so much a mistake, but looking back, there's definitely an opportunity cost of inaction. And
so interesting. I've had about a dozen guests on this podcast, and I always ask what are some of the biggest mistakes, that they feel they've made, and they've always been around not getting into the market sooner or the kind of properties that they didn't buy rather than the ones that they did buy. So, it was around, just listening to naysayers, as we were saying before, has been a really big one for people. So, no, that's good. And I guess the best time to invest in property was 10 years ago, and the next best time is
right now.
So, no, absolutely. What advice would you have for younger investors out there thinking about maybe they've got the deposit, they've done the research? What would be perhaps, let's say, some really strong leading indicators and advice that you'd give them on selecting specifically?
So on actually selecting
whether it's
markets,
a vacancy rate or a population growth forecast or something,
Yeah. So again, like you don't want to get to the point where it's analysis paralysis, because there's a million different data points you can look at. And with data, you can always spin it the way you want to see it. So if you've got a point that you want to be targeting, say under a 1% vacancy rate, and that property market is under 1%, but for the last 6 months it's been trending upwards, well, yes, it's met your point, but is that kind of a market you want to be buying in where the trend is negative and it's a fair chance of being above what you want to buy in 3-6 months' time? So there's a lot of different things. It's not just a data point. It's trends within that data point, and without I could talk about it all day. I think one of the big ones that I look for, it's probably one of the first things I check, is stock on market and the way that's trending. So I've got a figure of what I want the stock on market within that area to be. Ultimately, property is a supply and demand game. So if there's more supply than there is demand, prices are likely going to drop or plateau. And if there's an increased demand but not enough supply, which a lot of the markets, the Perths, the Adelaides, the Brisbanes have seen the last few years, that's when properties start booming like we have seen. So stock on market's one I definitely look at, but as I said earlier, it's not just the figure I'm looking at. I still want to see the trend going down, or at least staying at the level that it's at, not rising.
Do you prefer a market that's had strong growth previously, or do you prefer a market that hasn't yet boomed, and then you're like, if you're looking on a realestate.com, for instance, are you preferring a 15% spike up, or are you preferring a 3% spike down?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It ultimately comes down to the data. If the data on the one that's done negative 3% for the last year is right, I think that's a great buy. But if the data's still crap and it hasn't turned around yet,
sure,
I would like to see the ship turn around. So like looking at Melbourne and the suburbs there, we do see the value. Every kind of investor under the sun does see value at Melbourne at 800,000 price point when you compare it to the Perths, the Adelaides, the Brisbanes that are all more expensive at the moment. But until that kind of ship turns around, I'm just with my strategy and wanting to build so quickly, so early, I need that growth early. So I don't want to be 2-3 years early at a market and then plateau.
Timing the market cycle, very important.
So for me, yes, we want that long-term growth, but I don't plan on being, with my strategy anyway, I don't plan on being in the property market 40 years from now. I'd hope to have my passive income sorted well in advance of that. So I need that upfront growth.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Fantastic. And what does the next, let's say, 2 years look like for you? Do you have a property, how many properties you want goal or equity goal?
Yeah, so it's properties at the moment, but properties, like for most people, it's not like a serious goal. It just, for me, it's a way to track that I'm still making moves and I'm still moving. It's really the asset base that matters. If you had 10 $200,000 properties, that's $2 million, but if you had 6 $500,000, there's $3 million, but it sounds like one's got 10 properties, one has 6. So like online, you look like a star, and on the news and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, at the end of the day, we just want quality investments that are going to grow. So for me, I'm at the moment getting pre-approval, just put out about 130 in equity to go for the fourth one. And then once I hopefully purchase that in the next couple of months, been speaking with my broker who's a magician, and he reckons I've got pre-approval for the fifth as well. So hopefully early next year for that one.
Great, very exciting. Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of, I suppose, circling back to what you said about the equity versus growth thing, that was a big thing for me too. Like I stopped counting the number of properties that I was purchasing at about 27. I'm at 27 years old, I got to 20 investment properties, but the average value of the investment properties was probably around about $380,000, $390,000 if you leveled it all out. And then now I have less properties than that, but the per value property is, closer to $750,000. So, I definitely don't want to get caught up on the how many properties I had, and definitely like that was a mistake in the past where I was just like trying to run so fast and like being like working at Uber and then like Aussie Home Loans and then like a PAYG job. I was just like wanted to like see the fruit of my labor in the sense of like feel like I was progressing. But at the end of the day, that emotion can actually also hurt and hinder you, because if you're being too emotional about the investment and just wanting to feel good, then that can be detrimental as well. So it's definitely about the asset base rather than the number of properties. So I think that's really good that you've got that mindset at 24.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's easy to sell clicks and do all that kind of stuff online. It looks great, but at the end of the day, we're in property to build that asset base, and that's what matters.
Absolutely. Harley, it's been so great catching up today. Thank you for coming into the studio, and I'm sure everybody got massive and tremendous benefits. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Welcome.